You have heard every single one of these phrases, not from strangers, from people you trusted, people you loved, people whose opinion of you carried enough weight that when the phrases arrived, delivered quietly, sometimes gently, always at the precise moment you were least equipped to examine them. They landed before you had time to recognize what was happening, and some of them are still running, still surfacing in moments of doubt, still producing the specific internal disruption they were designed to produce, long after the person who deployed them is no longer in the room. That is not coincidence. That is engineering. Nietzsche wrote in Human, All Too Human, published in 1878, that the most effective instruments of psychological control are never the ones that announce themselves as control. They arrive dressed as honesty, as love, as the kind of uncomfortable truth that only someone who genuinely cares about you would be willing to say. And because they wear that costume so convincingly, because the delivery is so calibrated to the specific vulnerabilities of the person receiving them, they bypass the defenses that would have caught a more obvious attack. There are 7 of these phrases. Not because manipulation is limited to 7 expressions. It is not, but because these 7 carry a specific architecture that Nietzsche's framework identifies, and that psychology has since documented with precision. Each one is a distinct operation. Each one targets a specific vulnerability. And each one works when it works, because it is doing something the person receiving it has not yet learned to see. If you have ever walked away from a conversation feeling confused about something you understood clearly before it began, give this video a like right now, because what follows is going to make visible the mechanism inside the language that produced that confusion. 1. After everything I've done for you. 5 words, and inside them, an entire relational accounting system that you never agreed to participate in. What this phrase does structurally is convert past generosity, which was offered without stated conditions, into present leverage. The giving that occurred before this moment, whatever form it took, is now being retrospectively reclassified. It was not, it turns out, given freely. It was given on credit. And the credit is now being called in at a moment and in a form that the person receiving it never had the opportunity to evaluate before the debt was created. Robert Cialdini's research on influence identified reciprocity as one of the most powerful and most reliably exploitable principles in human social behavior. His findings demonstrated that the obligation to repay what we have received is so deeply embedded in human psychology that it can be activated even for gifts we did not request, even for generosity that was imposed rather than offered. The phrase, "after everything I've done for you," is the direct activation of this principle, deployed at the moment when the person saying it requires something that a straightforward request would not reliably produce. Nietzsche, in On the Genealogy of Morality, traced the psychology of debt with an unflinching precision that most moral philosophy has preferred to avoid. He observed that the most durable debts are not the ones whose terms are explicit. They are the ones that exist in the atmosphere of a relationship, felt but never articulated, impossible to repay because their conditions were never clear, impossible to dispute because disputing them requires questioning the love that generated them. After everything I've done for you is the moment the atmospheric debt becomes explicit. And the moment it becomes explicit, you are already inside a transaction you never consented to enter. 2. I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. This phrase accomplishes something that direct anger cannot. It occupies the moral high ground while delivering a more precise wound. Anger, expressed directly, is something you can respond to. You can defend yourself against it, contextualize it, recognize it as the other person's emotional state, rather than an accurate verdict on your character. Disappointment, particularly the parental register in which this phrase is almost always delivered, regardless of the actual relationship, is structurally different. It does not present itself as the speaker's feeling. It presents itself as an assessment of your adequacy. Not "I feel angry," but "you have failed to be what I needed you to be." John Gottman's research on contempt identified it as the single most destructive force in close relationships. The specific combination of superiority and disgust that communicates, beneath whatever words are being used, that the person expressing it has placed themselves above the person receiving it in the moral architecture of the relationship. "I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed," is contempt wearing the costume of restraint. It says, "I've transcended the emotional reactivity that anger would represent. What I'm offering you instead is a calm, considered evaluation of your failure." Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil, wrote about this specific rhetorical move, the claiming of moral elevation through the performance of equanimity, as one of the primary operations of what he called the ascetic priest type, the person who wields influence through the appearance of being above the desire for influence. The disappointment that never becomes anger is not more evolved than anger. It is anger that has learned to dress better, and it is significantly more difficult to defend against precisely because it has removed from itself the features that would make it recognizable as an attack. 3. You're too sensitive. 3 words that accomplish the most efficient possible form of psychological control. They make your perception of reality the problem rather than the behavior that your perception accurately registered. Jennifer Freyd at the University of Oregon, whose research on psychological manipulation and betrayal trauma has produced some of the field's most practically useful findings, documented the mechanism this phrase activates as a core feature of gaslighting: the systematic destabilization of another person's relationship with their own experience. The genius of "you're too sensitive" is its economy. It requires no engagement with the content of what you felt or observed. It simply reclassifies your response as the variable in need of correction. What makes this particularly effective on people with high emotional intelligence, the people it is most commonly deployed against, is that it activates genuine self-examination. You consider whether you are, in fact, being too sensitive. You review the event through the lens the phrase has provided, and in the time you spend examining your own perception rather than theirs, the behavior that prompted your response goes unexamined, unaddressed, and, by virtue of your apparent willingness to question yourself, tacitly ratified. Nietzsche, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, described the specific cruelty of this operation in terms that anticipate the clinical literature by decades. The person who teaches you to distrust your own perceptions has achieved something more complete than dominance. They have relocated the border control. You are now managing the frontier between acceptable and unacceptable experience, not at the point of their behavior, but at the point of your own reaction to it. The attack is over. You are now doing their work for them. 4. I was just trying to help. This phrase functions as a retrospective innocence claim, a reframing of behavior that produced harm as behavior that was organized around your benefit, delivered after the fact to eliminate accountability for the outcome. What it does structurally is make the evaluation of the behavior depend entirely on the stated intention rather than the actual effect. You experienced something as intrusive, controlling, or damaging. They were just trying to help. And if their intention was help, then your experience of harm is either a misreading of what happened or evidence that you are ungrateful for care that deserved better reception. Leon Festinger's research on cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort produced when 2 contradictory cognitions are held simultaneously, explains why this phrase is so difficult to navigate in real time. You experienced harm. You also believe this person cares about you. I was just trying to help forces you to hold both simultaneously and find a resolution. And the resolution that requires the least restructuring of your existing belief system, the one that preserves the most of what you already know, is almost always the one that questions your experience of the harm rather than their claim of the intention. Nietzsche in Aurora wrote about the morality of good intentions as one of the primary mechanisms through which people avoid accountability for the actual effects of their behavior. The intention becomes the entire moral story. The effect, your experience of it, the damage it produced, the pattern it forms part of, is rendered irrelevant by the prior claim of benevolence. "I was just trying to help," is not an explanation. It is a closing argument delivered before the case has been heard. Think about the last time someone caused you harm and immediately reframed it as care, and how much time you spent afterward questioning your own experience. Comment below. Good intentions don't cancel real harm. Just that. Because the person who needs that sentence has been forgiving the effect in deference to the intention for long enough. 5. Everyone agrees with me. The function of this phrase is the manufacturing of consensus that either does not exist or has been selectively constructed, deployed to make you feel that your position is not merely in conflict with one person's view, but with the collective judgment of everyone whose opinion matters. What it does to your interior in real time is precisely what it is designed to do. It activates the social comparison mechanism that Leon Festinger's research identified as one of the most fundamental features of human cognition. We evaluate the validity of our own perceptions partly by reference to whether others share them. The phrase, "everyone agrees with me," is a direct attack on this mechanism. It claims to have already performed the social comparison and returned a verdict against you before you had the opportunity to perform it yourself. In most cases, the claim is not accurate. Everyone is a construction, a selective mobilization of the perspectives that support the speaker's position, offered as a representative sample of universal opinion. Amy Cuddy's research at Harvard on social threat responses documented how powerfully the perception of social isolation, of being the only person who sees something a particular way, activates threat responses in the human nervous system. You're not simply being told you are wrong. You're being told you are alone in your wrongness. And the combination of those two things produces a very specific pressure to capitulate. Nietzsche, in Beyond Good and Evil, wrote about herd consensus as a mechanism of control that operates most effectively on people who have not yet developed a sufficiently stable internal reference point to withstand the pressure of apparent collective judgment. "Everyone agrees with me" is the herd invoked as an instrument, a manufactured majority designed to make your individual perception feel untenable precisely because it stands alone against a number that has been inflated to the point of seeming unanswerable. This channel exists outside the algorithm. No sponsorships, no brand deals, just research, writing, and the belief that ideas sharp enough to change how you see yourself are worth protecting. If this is giving you language for something you have been receiving without being able to name, consider supporting this work directly through the link in the description. Every contribution keeps this independent, and that independence is what makes this kind of precision possible. 6. If you really loved me, you would. This is the phrase that converts love into a compliance test, and in doing so, transforms the most genuine feeling you have for another person into the primary lever for controlling your behavior. What it does is establish a conditional definition of love, one in which the evidence of your feeling is not your presence, your care, your history, or your investment, but your willingness to do the specific thing being requested in this specific moment. Love, in this construction, is demonstrated through compliance, and withholding compliance, for any reason, including reasons that have nothing to do with the depth of your feeling, becomes evidence of insufficient love. Nietzsche, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, made the distinction that dismantles this phrase entirely. The love that requires the surrender of your own judgment as its proof is not asking for love. It is asking for submission, and submission, however it is requested, is not the same thing as love. Even when the request is delivered in love's language, with love's emotional register, at a moment of genuine vulnerability that makes the distinction almost impossible to hold. The clinical literature on emotional manipulation identifies this phrase as one of the most reliable markers of a relationship in which love has been instrumentalized, converted from something freely given into something conditionally deployed, available as warmth when it produces compliance and withdrawn as punishment when it doesn't. The phrase does not describe your love. It defines their terms for it, and accepting those terms is the beginning of a negotiation that was never going to end in your favor. 7. You're making me do this. The final phrase, and in some ways the most revealing, because it requires, for its delivery, a level of self-deception that illuminates something essential about the psychology of manipulation. This phrase transfers the agency for the speaker's behavior entirely onto you. Whatever they are doing, or threatening to do, is framed as a response to your choices rather than as a choice of their own. You have, by your behavior, removed their options. You have left them with no alternative. What follows, the rage, the withdrawal, the threat, the action, is not something they are choosing. It is something you are producing. What this accomplishes is the elimination of accountability at the moment when accountability matters most. The behavior that follows, "You're making me do this," cannot be evaluated as their behavior. It has been pre-classified as your behavior, expressed through them. They are not the agent. They are the instrument of your own choices returning to you. Nietzsche, in On the Genealogy of Morality, identified the abdication of agency as the defining feature of what he called the slave type. Not a moral designation, but a psychological one, describing the person whose relationship to their own behavior is organized around external causation rather than internal choice. "You're making me do this" is the purest possible expression of this abdication, a person who has, in the grammar of a single sentence, removed themselves from responsibility for what they are about to do to you. Epictetus, in the Enchiridion, made the observation that serves as the complete rebuttal. No one is made to do anything by another person's choices. What we do is always, at some level, chosen. The phrase, "You're making me do this," is not a description of causation. It is a performance of helplessness designed to make you responsible for what they are already determined to do. Now, the part that goes where most conversations about manipulation won't. Because across these 7 phrases, there is something that belongs to your side of this conversation, something that most analyses of manipulation carefully avoid saying, and that this one will not. These phrases work on specific people, not because those people are weak or naive or lacking in intelligence, because they have specific qualities that the phrases are engineered to engage: empathy, the capacity for genuine self-examination, the willingness to take seriously the possibility that they might be wrong, the investment in relationships deep enough to feel the threat of their deterioration as something worth significant concession to prevent. These are not flaws. They are the qualities that make genuine relationship possible, and they are the precise qualities that manipulation requires as its raw material. The person who cannot be reached by "after everything I've done for you" is someone incapable of gratitude. The person impervious to "you're too sensitive" is someone incapable of self-reflection. The person unmoved by "if you really loved me" is someone incapable of genuine care. The problem is not your capacity for these things. The problem is their deployment against people who have not yet learned to distinguish between situations where these qualities serve the relationship and situations where they are being extracted by someone organized around accessing them. Nietzsche's most essential contribution to this conversation, across Beyond Good and Evil, across the genealogy of morality, across the full arc of his critique of conventional morality, is the argument that genuine virtue is not the same as exploitable virtue. That empathy directed without discernment is not more moral than empathy that has learned to read the room. That the capacity to be moved by these phrases is worth protecting, which means protecting it from the situations in which it is being used against you. 2 questions for the comments. First, which of these 7 phrases has done the most work on you? The one whose specific architecture has produced the most reliable capitulation across the most time. Second, what changes in how you receive these phrases when you understand completely that they are tools rather than descriptions? That they are telling you something about the person using them rather than something accurate about you? Leave it below. And if this kind of examination, the precise, patient dismantling of the language that has been used to make you smaller, more compliant, more organized around someone else's needs than your own, is work you want to continue, subscribe. Because the next video goes into territory that connects directly to what this one opened. The phrases you've been hearing are not the truth about you. They are the blueprint of someone else's need, and knowing the difference is the beginning of everything.